New technology has made it easier for us to explore deep and distant spots on our planet than it has ever been before. This drone makes a chilling valley discovery that no one is supposed to see. Chen was on holiday in a stunning mountainous area. He wanted to test his new toy, a drone that could fly high in the air and work over much longer distances than any drone he had had before. It was exciting, and he couldn't wait to see what he could find. He was going to film in the cliffs, and he wanted to see the wildlife he could find with his drone. There are wonderful species in the area, including animals like monkeys and deer. As he was flying the drone, he heard that there were some caves in the cliffs. So, when he saw a valley, he went down into it. What types of secrets was it hiding? He would love to see places that he couldn't physically reach. It was one of the reasons he loved flying his drone. But suddenly, he had chills. He saw something on the camera that he couldn't explain, but it sent shivers down his spine. He couldn't completely comprehend what he was seeing, but it felt like he shouldn't be witnessing this. It felt like he had stumbled onto something that was either scary or very scared and special. He had to figure out what it was. There were wood boxes all over the place. He took the drone closer and saw that it was wooden coffins, all packed in the caves. The cave was filled to the brink with wood coffins. The coffins were in different stages of decay. It was unnerving to see. Chen wanted to know what the story was behind these coffins. They moved him, and the image would remain in his mind. What he found was sad but beautiful. There are several different stories and reasons why the local people, even now, place their dearly departed in wood coffins and into caves. This was all happening on the steep cliffs of Anshun in southwest China's Guizhou province. The region has beautiful valleys, cliffs, and stunning landscapes, but it is the people that make it even more special. There are 5 villages surrounding the caves, and they have a rich history, one that is connected to the coffins in the caves. The practice of placing coffins in the caves went back to ancient times. The first theory on why it started goes back to the time when the villagers first settled in the area. It was a heartbreaking folk story that had been told through generations, and one that many people believed to be fact. Long ago, the mountains had no inhabitants. There were no villages, and it was completely deserted. It was a beautiful place, but it took a lot of work to get there. The land was not easy to live on, and that was why there were more people in the lower-lying areas. The mountains could produce wonderful products, but the villagers who would later settle there needed to adapt and learn how to work with the land. It had many challenges. But despite all the challenges of this mountain region, it would become a safe haven for a whole group of people. During that time, the ancestors of the village lived on the plains in central China. But then, a terrible war broke out, and they had to flee. They traveled far and tried to find a new home. And that was when the weary travelers came to the mountainous Guizhou province. They decided to stay there, but some of them were ill and tired from their travels. They lost a few people on the way, and they kept the bodies with them. They needed a place to lay them to rest. Losing their home was difficult, and starting fresh is never easy, especially back then when the world was a very different place. They started to make a home for themselves. Different families lived in different areas of the mountains, creating separate villages that were all still connected by their shared past. They began to build something really amazing, but for many of the villagers, it didn't feel like home yet. And when they lost family members in death, they didn't want to bury them. If they did this, then it would be their final resting space, and they forever be a part of the mountains. The legend and folktales say that they decided to give their family temporary resting places. They built strong wooden coffins and then took their deceased loved ones, and they used the caves in the region to place them to rest there. These villagers hoped to one day return home, and by placing the coffins in the caves, they would be able to take their loved ones home with them. Then they could bury them in their ancestral land. But that never happened. They never returned to their homeland, and the mountains did become home. The villages remained there for centuries, and a new tradition was born. Their children and grandchildren from then on placed their own deceased loved ones in caves. Many wanted to be with their family who already rested in the caves. It became a natural cemetery. Eventually, the cave's floor filled up, and they had to start stacking coffins on top of the others. Now, these caves are packed with coffins. Only one of the caves has more than 500 coffins inside it. The coffins are stacked in layers, and you can see the age of the older coffins only because they are in different stages of decay. The structure of the coffins are still the same as those that were made many years ago. There are numerous caves that are filled with these coffins, so there is no telling just how many coffins are placed in the caves at this time. It is a lot, and it shows just how long this tradition has been going on. Many believe that the story of the villagers just waiting to take their loved ones home is completely factual. But it is not the only theory on why these coffins are placed in this way. Another reason could simply be that it was practical and safer. It is not as romantic as the first theory, but it is one that also makes a lot of sense. Some people believe that the tradition of placing coffins in caves began in ancient times to make sure that their loved ones would not be disturbed. The area floods often. After the villagers started to move into the region, they began to build their lives, and part of life is death. When those ancient villagers created the first cemetery in the mountains, they believed their loved ones would remain there forever. But that was not what happened. One day, it started to rain, and it didn't stop. Before long, the land was flooded, and everything was soggy. The villagers couldn't walk far because the ground was so saturated, and they kept getting caught in the mud. For days, the water bucketed down. The villagers were so busy trying to keep their homes safe that they didn't think of anything else. But that would soon change. When the sun finally came out, they started to clean things up. There was a lot of damage in the village, and they needed to make sure that everyone was safe. So, one of the villagers set out to go on a hike. They wanted to travel to all the neighboring villages to ensure that family and friends were all alive and healthy. But as this villager walked past the new cemetery, he saw a shocking sight. The flooding opened many of the graves, and because the cemetery sat on an angle, some of the coffins opened and slid away. Legend has it that this was a horrible experience, and they soon realized that this was a normal thing in the area. Floods happened often, and buried coffins always came out worse for the wear. In this theory, the villagers started to search for ways that they could protect their dearly departed. They scouted their new land and came upon the caves. A few times, the villagers had to flee to the caves to stay safe during the floods. They realized that the caves were dry and safe. It was the perfect place to stack their deceased loved ones. Their coffins would be safe, and they never needed to be disturbed again. It was a lot better, and despite a few villagers who weren't sure of this idea, it soon became a tradition. And it obviously worked because Chen could see coffins that were very old. The wood would decay on its own over time, and you could see that. This was a theory that made a lot of sense. But like most places with long traditions, no one could agree on which of the stories was the real one. And those weren't the only folktales surrounding the stories. Chen could find even more legends that explained the choice. There was one more theory that many people believed to be true. The final explanation showed how this practice was impacted by their religious beliefs and how they hoped to help their family in the afterlife. The people in the mountains take great pride in living at higher altitudes. The cities in the area are situated below the mountains, and there is a lot less crime up high. In many ways, they still practice the same lifestyles they did as when their ancestors lived in the mountains hundreds of years ago. Their lives depend on the land, and they work with it to live and thrive. The mountains are stunning, and the villagers believe that it is almost like a holy place. They believe that the higher up you are, the closer you are to heaven. They believe that if they were to bury the coffins, it would be like creating more obstacles in their loved one's quest to get to heaven. By stacking them instead, they believe that the departed are closer to heaven and can get there easier. They also feel a connection to the wood and trees that the coffins are made from. It is a vessel to help release the souls into the heavens. Some believe the act of allowing the coffins to rot over many years and break down naturally helps allow the souls of the people inside to ascend into the heavens. By performing this ancient ritual of stacking the coffins of the departed in the caves, they are showing their love for those they lost the final time. It is sacred and filled with meaning to those who practice this ritual. Of course, there are those who believe that there is a much simpler explanation for why this practice started to happen. It was simply more practical to stack the coffins in the caves that were already created as a kind of mausoleum than to try and bury them. The rainy season in the land is long and tough. There is a saying about the area of Guizhou that goes like this: "The sky is not clear for 3 days. The land is not level for 3 li." Li, which is a traditional Chinese distance measurement, and the people don't have 3 cents. Many of the people are poor, and when they don't keep working, they can lose money that they can't afford to lose. It takes time to dig a grave, time they could be working to feed their families. This was even more true in ancient times, when not working the land meant not having food. The land is not level, and this makes it even more difficult and treacherous to dig a grave. Back when they had no tools to help them, people could get injured while digging graves. And then, because the sky is not clear for 3 days, or it is always wet, there weren't a lot of opportune moments to dig a grave in the first place. Placing these coffins in the cave saved the inhabitants of the mountains money and a great deal of effort. Why wouldn't they use this option that nature created to avoid all of that? It makes sense, and even if this idea isn't as touching as some of the other folktales, it does tell a story of real people. They struggled to survive, and they had to adapt to a climate that was not easy. They did their best for their departed loved ones by treating them with dignity and respect. But they also had to consider those that remained, and they had to keep providing for them. There is something heartbreakingly beautiful about that too. During his search for the truth, Chen learned a lot. His drone made a chilling valley discovery that no one is supposed to see, but it told a wonderful story of the incredible people that live in the region. For Chen, making this discovery was one of the most beautiful experiences in his life. Yes, it was chilling and made him nervous at first, but learning about the strong people in the province made him proud of them. We will probably never know exactly which of the theories is the correct one, and it could likely be a combination of all of them. They could have hoped to take these people home one day. They were likely impacted by their beliefs and by practical matters like the floods in the area and the ease of burial. But does it really matter why the people started to use the caves as their final resting place? How those caves filled with coffins came to be is irrelevant in many ways. They are now a sacred place that tells the story of so many lives that were lived. Real people who loved and lived. Multiple caves are filled with these coffins. As mentioned, only one of them has more than 500 wooden coffins at last count. Wood coffins that were lovingly created to show respect. Those are the remnants of a lot of real people. These caves hold history, and they hold people. No one might remember the people in the very first layers anymore, but as they are stacked, you can probably find connections. Finding those who loved people in the first layer, in the second layer, all the way up to today when people who are now being set to rest are loved and remembered. So, in many ways, the caves are a physical depiction of the connections we all have. The way that humans are connected even when we can't remember exactly how. And is there anything more beautiful than that connection? Thanks for watching. Join us again for even more incredible stories.